Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's debate hosted by the Warsaw Institute with support of National Institute of Freedom. Today, we will break down the results of US presidential elections and US election in general. A lot has happened. A lot of unexpected results in the states have occurred. So there is a lot to speak about. My pleasure to welcome on board today our two experts, Kasper Kita. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
And Benjamin Bardos. Good afternoon, Benjamin.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Before we move to the policy part of the incoming US administration, I want to ask you about the elections themselves. I want to ask you about the key factors that influenced the outcome that we have now. So Donald J. Trump winning and Kamala Harris losing this presidential run. I want to ask you, what was the result more due to good policy ideas by the Republicans, or poor performance of Democrats, or somewhere between? What is your opinion on that? How do you see it? Kasper Kita.
Well, obviously, it's always something in between, but I think that it's to a larger degree the errors of the Democratic administration. Certainly, we see that the economic situation is quite dire, at least in the subjective opinion of the American population. We see in the exit polls that around 2/3 of US population see the economic situation as either bad or very bad, which is much more than, for example, 4 years ago, even though it was 4 years ago that the US and the entire world was in the middle of a pandemic with companies closed down, with all the restrictions, over recession, etc. Back then it was around 50-50. So we certainly see that the Biden administration hasn't delivered, at least judged by how the average American perceive one's own material situation. You also see that in terms of immigration, a large majority of Americans think that the administration has been too lenient, and certainly all the chaos around who will be the Democratic nominee didn't help. I think history will judge, but if President Biden decided early on that he will not seek a second term, and the Democrats were able to have a normal primary process, and therefore were able to assess the actual popularity of different candidates during the entire year or so that you would have, with first informal campaign, then you would have the actual primaries and caucuses. Well, then you would be able to actually see if Kamala Harris would be the nominee, because obviously during her previous run she had a very disappointing result back in 2019, and here we also could see that she hasn't got much to offer in herself, apart from some platitudes about about a new generation in politics, and trying not to offend neither the more left-wing social democrat voter nor the more centrist or Nikki Haley type of voter, but she didn't have much positive offer by herself. She just tried to be a vote for anyone who didn't want Trump to become president again. And I think that this was certainly insufficient, and the longer her campaign was in place, the more we saw that she just hasn't got really much to offer. And you could see that in the polls, that the voters who decided in the last week or in the last few weeks went to Trump, while those who were decided beforehand had a slight the Democrats had a slight edge. So I think that if the Democrats had a better candidate and they had more time to decide on that, then they could have won.
Thank you very much, Kacper. So on one hand, we have economic situation that could be the driving factor for the outcome. On the other hand, Kamala Harris stepping on a short notice for the presidential run without prior, let's say, research on the chance of maybe another candidate by the Democrats. I will now give the floor to Benjamin with the same question about the factors that influenced the outcome that we have now.
Thank you. No, as we saw a lot of traditional states which we might expect to vote Democrat or in majority Democrats, such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, California, these are bastions of Democrat supporters. We saw that to a large degree or to a significant extent from what would normally be expected, we saw that these states voted abnormally high for the Republican nominee, which was in this case Donald Trump. And the factors which might attribute to this absolutely builds upon the fact that there was a little bit of chaos, that Biden stepped back and then Kamala came forward. But it also came down to what I think is very ostensible from the environment of the American political landscape, was that a lot of these Democrat policies, especially when concerning social policies, didn't land as well as one would have expected, I suppose, in the Democrat Party, as they were expecting. And this pushed or alienated a lot of voters from the Democratic Party and pushed them towards the Republican side. Also, there were key issues such as the handling of the war in Ukraine, foreign policy, but really narrowing in on the domestic side of it, absolutely, the economy has not been seeing the best of its days. Inflation definitely pushed a lot of people to Trump's more appealing program to tackle the American working population's needs, to address their living standards, the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis. These were all things that people evidently saw more hope in the Republican side rather than the Democrat side. And then there were also more short-term push and pull factors, such as the hurricane and the North Carolina environmental disaster. These were all things which usually heavily influence politics on a regional and on a national scale. And we saw that the handling of these natural disasters did indeed push a lot of people towards towards the Republican Party. But it's really an amalgam, and all of these issues together compounding on one and each other in light of all the recent issues that have been plaguing the country for the past 4 years, and this sort of accustomed beacon of hope that people have already had a taste of. Naturally, there's that unsavory bit of unpredictability when it comes to the Republican nominee. But as it seems, a lot of people chose the hopes and promises that Trump was giving over the unpredictability that might come along with him.
Thank you very much. So we have economy, we have inflation, we have housing crisis, we have environmental disasters that influenced the decisions of US society during these elections. We'll stay with you, Benjamin, for the next question. But before, I highly recommend our viewers to ask questions in the chat related to American elections. And coming back to Benjamin, you've mentioned a lot about internal policy of the United States under the Democrats that influenced the outcome of the elections. I want to ask you now if you expect any policy changes related to internal policy of the United States. Of course, we know that the administration is still under forming. We still do not know all of the names, all of the plans. But if you could just give us a short anticipation what may happen regarding internal policy after Donald Trump takes over the office.
Absolutely. So, one of the most drastic changes that can be expected with respect to how it was is immigration. This has been an issue that has been a sore point for a lot of Americans, especially for the southern states, and has since then expanded into a nationally riling issue. And under the Democratic administration, we saw a very lenient posture towards handling immigration issues, whether that be with the southern border or just an over-encompassing perspective on the country. And what can definitely be expected under the Trump administration, as we saw with the new position being opened of the border czar, that we can expect a lot of deportations, but this won't go back onto what was previously in the 2020 election, a very hot topic of recognizing what was previous administrations' base recognition of legalized immigrants. That won't really be the main focus right now, but solving first and foremost the massive amounts of people coming through the southern border and the handling of those people within the borders in the United States. So there will definitely be a spike in deportations, 100%. Foreign policy is yet another field of policy which is definitely up for change, as can be read a lot about the United States' trade policy, and this America First trade policy is definitely going to expect some of the previous trade wars which we might have experienced under the previous Trump administration. And for the last 4 years, it seems that the European Union and the United States, even under this Biden administration lax period, haven't been able to settle some of their differences, which came to be a hot topic under the previous Trump administration. Some of them being steel, automotive industry, the green industry, such as green energy, renewables. These are all definitely going to be taking a hit when it comes to foreign companies. There's the China policy as well. While Biden has been mainly in line and hasn't deviated from it too significantly from what was left after the previous Trump administration, we can definitely expect a more hawkish American attitude towards the Chinese. And then, of course, there's the glaring question of the Russia-Ukrainian war. That's another field where Trump has had a lot of promises, specifically about ending the war in one day. Now, while I can't attest to what degree he's going to hold up to that promise, but what can definitely be expected is a more ardent attitude in finding a solution for this war, even if it might come with the more, how would one say it, the question of giving up territories towards the Russians in a peace settlement. These topics, as political as they are, is something that is becoming extremely and evidently more so believable as a plausible course of action under the Trump administration. And then lastly, I'll just leave this off as a brief note, even though it's a massive topic. The social policies, specifically regarding the LGBTQ policies in the United States, those are definitely going to be seeing a reversal. It has been one of the things that Trump has been most vocal about ever since the conclusion of the elections, at least the presidential elections. The majority leader in Congress is still up for grabs, which will be determining a lot of the agendas that the Trump administration can pass and a lot of the policy projects that they might endeavor to embark on in their first 100 days. But these are areas in which we can definitely expect a massive change as from the current status quo.
Thank you very much. Immigration, this is a huge challenge in front of the Donald Trump's administration, and it's also a challenge for European leaders as well. In relation to war in Ukraine, of course, this is one of the most urgent topics articulated by Donald Trump during the electoral campaign. So we are anticipating probably some solutions in the closest future. So I hope we'll have another debate on that as well. And now I will pass the voice to Kacper Kita. First, with question about internal policy and your expectations and anticipations, what can happen. And then, of course, if you could just complement what Benjamin mentioned about a war in Ukraine.
Yes. Oh, first of all, I of course agree with what Benjamin said. Obviously, immigration will be, I think, both the policy that will be perhaps the expected one to do. Much more deportations, stricter action by the government regarding illegal immigrants, perhaps also some curbing of legal immigrants. But this will be an interesting topic to see, because on one hand we have immigration hawks like Stephen Miller, who is poised to be the deputy chief of staff in the White House, who for years has advocated also reducing legal immigration, but we also have a lot of business minded people. Elon Musk himself, for example, would certainly be in favor of legal immigration, at least from certain areas, and perhaps even making it more easy to get into America in certain industries. So this will be an interesting thing to watch, what actually happens with the Trump administration. Certainly, I would also add the tax policy will be interesting to see. The tax policy, which was obviously interconnected with the tariff policy, because one needs money for the budget to work. On one hand, Trump will want to have his own tax cuts from 2017 for more years, because they are time limited. He will want Congress to make them perhaps even go further in reducing taxes on individual citizens, but also he may want these tax cuts to be put in place for many years to come. We will see. But on the other hand, he will try to impose more and more tariffs on goods, and we will see how far he will go in that, and also how far will the Congress allow him to go on both these areas, because these are not issues on which the Republican Party is 100%. Not on the same page. The other thing I would briefly address is the climate policy. Certainly, Trump will reduce the environmental restrictions. He will want to once again push America away from the Paris Accords, as he did back in 2017. And this will be also interesting, obviously, from a European perspective, because this may also affect how the European countries address their own environmental and energetical policy. Regarding foreign policy, well, certainly the war in Ukraine will be the crucial thing to do. I think that on one hand, we see that after almost 3 years from Russian full-scale aggression, we see that on one hand the glass is half full, in the sense that the Ukrainians have been able to defend themselves. But on the other hand, under the Biden administration, the glass is half empty, in the sense that they've not been able to push the Russians away from the territory, even to the country. In the last months, it's the Russians who more and more gain territory in eastern Ukraine, and the Biden administration hasn't been able first to push Putin not to attack, even though they knew with many months beforehand that he plans a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They weren't able to influence his crucial decision, even though they negotiated with him, they threatened sanctions, etc. And this is, I think, the crucial question: to what degree America can influence Russia, to what degree America can push Russia to amend its behavior on the international scene without directly engaging American soldiers. Because on one hand, Americans will want, obviously, Russia to end the hostilities, and the Americans perhaps even would like to have a modus vivendi with Russia, but this would require Russia stopping attacking other countries in Europe, and certainly this will be difficult. This will be demanding to achieve. While at the same time, the Americans certainly neither the American society nor, I think, the American foreign policy elites do not want to engage American soldiers, obviously, in Ukraine. And this will be, I think, a very demanding question to resolve. And we will see what will the new administration do. But for the time being, we see that probably the people in charge will be neither, I would say, the isolationists and people who often saw, in Trump a possible someone they could use, a tool to fully, for example, reduce American engagement in Europe or go full on reapproachment with Russia. People like Tucker Carlson, for example. But it's more people from the old Republican establishment who, at the same time, have gradually become Trump-like in their attitude towards at least segments of foreign policy, like the possible new State Secretary Marco Rubio is obviously the best example, but you also have people like Eliza Stefanik, who may be the UN ambassador. These are not isolationists who would want the American state to focus on its own internal policy. They just want to choose in what conflicts they engage and to what degree. But Rubio for years has been advocating using American power to against Russia. He called Putin a criminal, etc. As a senator. And you would find many instances, for example, regarding the Afghanistan war. Both Rubio and the possible new national security advisor, Mr. Waltz, they were against America leaving Afghanistan, which was obviously the most pressuring war in which America has been engaged for 2 decades, which was massively attacked by many people on the American right wing as something that they want to get rid of. So this is, I think, something that makes more probable. All this, I think, makes it more probable that Trump will not just go away from Ukraine, will not allow Kiev to fall. I think that he and Rubio will try to negotiate some settlement with Russia, but this will be certainly demanding because Russia does not want, to just have some territories and for Ukraine to become, integrated with the West. And Russia wants disintegrating Ukraine and it's not being able to defend itself. So this will be very demanding, but we should also, I think, steer away from the more hysterical comments that we sometimes see in the media.
Thank you very much. Indeed, Russia will only accept some kind of peace, but on its own conditions. So this is not very optimistic for our region. But we spoke about foreign policy, about war in Ukraine. So now let's move on to the Central and Eastern Europe. I'd like to ask you if you expect any major changes of foreign policy towards this region, plus the Three Seas Initiative, because as we know, Donald Trump was a huge supporter and participated himself in one of the Three Seas summits. So I'd like to ask you about US perspectives towards our region, Central and Eastern Europe. Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Well, now Central Eastern Europe is in the limelight of a security situation owing to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And Trump has put this sense of security in a little bit of a jeopardy situation in his past administration with his remarks towards NATO about the Article 5 security element. His comments about it has made some nations question the United States' commitment to these countries. However, I think Trump will continue on his prior policy of getting Europe to pay their fair share. And as for now, from what we can ascertain from what he said and his previous course of action, I don't think, and I think it would be a short-sighted remark to say that Trump would be throwing Eastern Europe under the bus in any sense. I think that Trump will make it a priority, especially in the deterrence policy against Russia, while trying to forge some sort of peace agreement or some sort of resolution, as previously mentioned, with Rubio, who's been incredibly ardent in being hawkish and using American policy, as said likewise. So this region, I don't think is going to be up for grabs in any situation. However, economically, it will definitely feel some sort of impact due to the EU tariffs that will be imposed through the American foreign policy objectives, especially economically. The Three Seas initiative, it remains to be seen what Trump's new position will be around it, whether he will remain in the same optimistic and eager position towards Three Seas initiative as was before, or whether this might be influenced and come under a new perspective by him. That remains to be seen, as with many things currently with the Trump administration. However, just to sum it in a nutshell, Eastern Europe, I don't think has anything to be afraid of. There are particular countries such as Poland or Hungary who have ardently stood by with Trump in the past 4 years, even while he wasn't president. So it does beg the question whether this might pose some sort of duality in treatment for these nations, even in spite of the fact of how Trump might act towards the EU as a whole, which would be an interesting dynamic as is. However, more details are needed to assess that in its entirety. But what is definitely to be seen as a continuing trend, as is currently already, is Eastern European nations have been a prime consumer of American weaponry. And it seems that in Trump's mentality, this is something that these nations will definitely continue doing so, if not to curry favor with the incumbent president, but also as a whole to appease this idea of making Europe pay for their security. So it remains to be seen what specific policies Trump will have for this region. It will unfortunately be hand in hand with the EU policies, as it is a single economic region. So the effects of it will be felt. But yes, so Eastern Europe is definitely going to be a forefront position of the deterrence posture come January, when Trump will try and end the war. And I suppose everybody's eagerly awaiting his efforts in that regard.
Thank you, Benjamin. So as you've mentioned, we still have a lot of question marks related to Donald Trump's upcoming term. But now I will move with the question to Kacper Kita, the same one about US policy towards the CE. And here I would like to also ask you, Kacper, to give us some kind of short overview. What can we expect as Poland from the upcoming US administration, especially that we are a Polish think tank, so definitely our viewers would appreciate your overview on Poland as well.
Well, certainly our region will be affected by US trade policy towards EU, as it was already mentioned by Benjamin, and obviously also we will be, how Trump will address the war in Ukraine, and generally his attitude towards Russia will be crucial, because obviously by negotiating with Russia, he will, and by behaving towards Russia in a certain way, both via diplomatic, economic, and military means. I mean, for example, deployment of troops, for example, in Poland or in other countries. Well, he would show what is his attitude towards our region, and certainly. With Poland, we've seen a very good relationship between Poland and the United States during the first Trump term, especially good relationship between Polish President Duda and Trump himself. And we will see now in the coming months to what degree will these ties materialize in concrete policy decisions. For example, trade, as it was already mentioned, troops, but also to what degree will Trump be willing to, in some degree, show that he thinks Poland is a better ally than Germany. This has been, something that many in Poland would like to happen, because obviously Germany has been, as a trading partner, often quite attacked, to be honest, by Trump, as someone who's taking an unfair amount of American money, who has been enjoying a free ride regarding security thanks to the Americans, and also whose companies have been profiting from an American trade policy that Trump would regard as not sufficiently assertive. But on the other hand, it is also obvious that Germany has been the pillar of American position in Europe ever since the Second World War, and those who would think that that any US president would totally abandon Germany, I think this is quite naive. But we will see what will be the actual proportions between Trump continuing the US-German relationship, especially also with an upcoming election in Germany next year, and possibly a new chancellor with Friedrich Merz. And on the other hand, to what degree will he want to present Poland, who has been spending much more on defense, for example, and has been eager to show itself as a country, for example, also willing to buy from America, and not as Germany be dependent on Russian energy for many years. For Germans continued this as long as they could. We will see how the Americans under Trump will actually judge this. To what degree will they want to actually incentivize countries in our region to behave like Poland behaved in recent years, and to what degree they would think, well, it's good that Poland has already moved, and now we would want to push others to do the same way, but also not by being too harsh on them, for example, regarding Berlin. So this will be very interesting to watch. And we will also see how the Americans will behave vis-à-vis Hungary, who certainly under Prime Minister Orban has been a crucial personal political partner for Trump, who even mentioned him as a crucial partner during the debate with Kamala Harris. And certainly the Hungarian government for years has been willing to build ties with Trump. And we'll see to what degree will this now mean a more Hungarian-friendly policy from the Americans. For example, regarding ties with China and Russia. So this will be very interesting to watch. But generally, I also think that Central Eastern Europe shouldn't be afraid. But on the other hand, we also need to be aware of the fact that the Americans have many other fish to fry, and that they also have limited resources, and that they will be demanding. And I think from Poland's perspective, this can be a good thing if the Americans can pressure other European countries, for example, to be more serious about their defense spending. So I think that we shouldn't get intertwined in this binary choice between America and Europe. I think this can be mutually beneficial if Europe grows more serious about its defense policy, its defense industry. For example, this can both mean a more secure Europe, a more perhaps even autonomous Europe in a degree, but at the same time, the Americans also happy with not being forced to use use that much of resources here. But on the other hand, we know that there's been much more talk about European security than actual action that would produce tangible results. So I think this is also a hard reality that President Trump will also meet once he is in power, and he once again tries to pressure Europeans, as all recent US presidents have done, with some results but limited results.
Thank you very much, Kacper. As you said, Americans have a lot of and other topics going on as well. So at the end, I would like to ask you the brief question. I know it's pretty wide, but if you could just give us a short answer or statement on that. What will Donald Trump do in terms of conflict on Middle East? What's your opinion? Kacper, we are staying with you for this one.
Well, certainly Trump has been a vocal supporter of Israel for years, and we've seen during his first term that he was very happy to engage in a not ordinary way with Arab countries like United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, for example, pushing them to engage with Israel and to cooperate against Iran. But on the other hand, well, I think Trump will also want to have some settlement towards the Gaza war. Obviously, Trump is a deal maker. He will want to have a deal that he would have his name enshrined on it. But obviously, also Israel is not eager to just cease hostilities. They want to eradicate Hamas. They believe that this is crucial for Israeli security, and they will want to get as much US support for that as possible. They will see Trump as a president who will be more willing to help Israel in this regard than Biden. And I think this will be also a demanding task for Trump, because on one hand, he will not want to get too much engaged in a full-scale war in the Middle East. But on the other hand, certainly Israel now feels, and Prime Minister Netanyahu himself now feels, that they have a window of opportunity to eradicate or at least go after their enemies as much as possible and weaken them as much as possible. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iranian proxies in Syria, Iran itself, and certainly they will see a Trump administration as a window of opportunity, and they will want the Americans to engage with them. So this will be, and also it will be interesting to see how the American-Saudi relationship grows and the American-Egyptian relationship grows, because on one hand, obviously, these two countries have been the pillars of American alliance system in the Middle East for years. But on the other hand, they've been also quite prone in recent years to try to develop their own relationship with China, for example. We've seen Egyptian president and United Arab Emirates president in Kazan in Russia just a few weeks ago and at the BRICS summit. This is certainly not something that the Americans like. And we've also seen, harsh words going after Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from Marco Rubio when he was, he still is a senator, but now he will probably be state secretary, and we will see how this will develop.
Thank you very much. Well said, Donald Trump as a deal maker. We'll try to close a deal on that matter as well. And now for the last answer for today's debate, I will give the floor to Benjamin to complement the topic of what will Donald Trump do in terms of Middle East conflict.
Absolutely. So agreeing with everything that Kacper said so far, the Middle East is definitely going to be a test and a testament to Trump's administration. There are many forces within the United States political landscape that would like to pressure the Israelis into going into a ceasefire. However, as we've seen that with the firing of the Israeli Secretary of Defense, there are even differing ties and thoughts about that on the matter in Israel itself. Meanwhile, the Republican Party is a particularly keen supporter of the Israeli effort. They've been particularly vocal about that. So seeing how the United States can broker some sort of agreement while also adhering to most of their policy objectives and their aims, as Kacper said previously, the Iranis, there comes also the Houthis, there's the situation in Lebanon on the ground right now. So there's many tangents to the situation in Israel, and there's definitely risk associated with how this can pan out. Naturally, it wouldn't be in the interest of the administration for the scope of the conflict to expand. So there is a silver lining somewhere, which the administration will have to tread carefully in order to successfully broker a deal. However, as Casper said, and I'll refer back to that, the relationships with the Saudis is definitely something to have a watchful eye on. The United States, especially under the Trump administration, wants to take away most of the red tape on energy production, which has been a pretty big policy of the Democrat administration previously, particularly on LNG, which affected Europe particularly, but also on shale oil, which was also red taped in a lot of areas for environmental concerns. Now, these are all things which were mentioned that Trump will deviate from environmental standards, and transferring this onto the United States' energy independence or energy security, it will definitely influence the dynamic in which the United States will approach the Middle East. And what probably cannot be expected, as we saw under the Biden administration, where Biden went to Saudi Arabia to ask for production increases and to influence the Russians. So this is something that we probably won't be expecting, and will be probably witnessing a more strong armish and bearish approach to American policy towards the Middle East, especially having been bolstered by an increased energy production, which is expected under the Trump administration. Until now, in the Biden administration, these were things that heavily influence U.S. policy, whether it be towards Russia or internally in the Middle East. So the Israeli situation is definitely something that the Trump administration wants to deal with. Its approach towards the grander Middle East will definitely be more hawkish. It will want to deal with the proxies of the Middle Eastern axis of resistance. There's other forces naturally to be mentioned, such as Assad, and there come in the Russians, likewise with the Iranians. So this Middle Eastern conflict is more interconnected with the conflict in Europe than one would like to think. And so it'll be very interesting to see what the approach of the Trump administration will be in mediating both of these very different conflicts. As in the Israeli conflict, it is the Israelis who do not want to make concessions. Meanwhile, on the other conflict in Europe, it's the Russians who don't want to make concessions, likewise the Ukrainians, of course. But so there are two opposing positions of power when looked at from their positions, whether that being more Western leaning or Eastern leaning. So it's definitely something to keep a watchful eye on. And it can definitely be expected that the two, Israel and Ukraine, when the time for negotiations come around, there will be a joint position of some sort towards negotiating a final, whether it be lasting or not is a different question, but a final resolution as an interim solution to these conflicts. It will definitely take into account both conflicts as one, as ultimately the two are not really separable. They're not really two entirely different conflicts, especially from the security perspective of the United States. And when we start recognizing and looking at the allies of each and every opposing force that is currently concerned. So it'll be an interesting 4 years, that's for sure. But as with all the times, and this is probably the closing words for myself, people is policy. And currently the people that Trump is aiming to or has already surrounded himself with definitely hint towards the fact that, as I've said many times before, but I can only repeat it more, is a very hawkish and bullish United States. And unlike in the Biden administration, we can definitely expect that the United States will stand up for its own interests more than we've been probably used to for the past couple of decades, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it'll be a very interesting, possibly even a paradigm shift of how we look at the United States on the global world and the global stage.
Thank you very much. People is policy. So let's look forward to more and more nominations for U.S. administration and, of course, foreign representatives as well. And probably we will find out more within the next weeks. Gentlemen, that was the last question for today. Thank you very much for sharing your interesting insights and opinions with our viewers. And to our viewers, especially Polish viewers, I highly invite everyone for the Thursday debate, where we will cover the topic of Moldova and Moldova's internal situation after the presidential election. Thank you very much once again for participation, for being with us, and have a great week ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.